The vast plains of Montana stretched endlessly as Pastor Elijah rode forward, feeling a strange pull guiding his every move. The wind carried whispers that seemed to know his name, urging him deeper into a destiny he never imagined facing alone in that wild frontier. A shifting sky, painted with copper clouds, signaled that something powerful was approaching. Elijah felt a trembling sense of fate weaving around him, as if the land itself awaited a decision only he could make. Each breath tasted of mystery and unspoken warnings. As he reached a ridge overlooking miles of open land, his heart raced with a sudden certainty. Something extraordinary was about to cross his path. In that moment, he knew he wasn't just traveling west. He was stepping into a chapter written long before his arrival in Montana. Then, as thunder cracked through the sky, a lone silhouette on horseback emerged from the storm's edge, and Elijah instantly felt that this encounter would shape every future moment of his life. Pastor Elijah rode cautiously down the dirt trail as the Montana heat clung to the air. The scent of dry grass mixed with the faraway promise of rain. Something unseen pressed on his spirit, not with fear, but with an expectant pull. Each hoofbeat felt like a step deeper into fate. When he spotted a cowboy waiting ahead on a chestnut horse, Elijah sensed the man's presence dominated the open field. Anthony's green eyes carried a storm of their own, weighted with unspoken stories. He looked like someone who had survived more than he cared to admit. Anthony tilted his head, surprised to see a lone pastor traveling through this rugged land. He warned Elijah that a dangerous storm was closing in quicker than any he had witnessed. He insisted no traveler should continue riding with weather like that building above the hills. Elijah thanked him, but said he felt compelled to move forward. Anthony frowned at the stubborn certainty in the pastor's voice. Even as a hardened cowboy, he felt uneasy. Yet something about Elijah made him pause before challenging that determination. Dust swirled in the rising wind as they spoke. Anthony shared old Montana tales of storms that carried signs, chills that traveled ahead of fate, and skies that changed without warning. Elijah listened closely, feeling a prickling sensation run along his arms. From the distance, Helen arrived, running toward them, her prairie dress whipping around her legs. She called out that Grandma Geraldine had fallen gravely ill and needed help immediately. Her breath trembled as she explained, revealing how dire the situation had become. Marina arrived moments later, her curls soaked with the first hints of rain. She warned that the approaching storm was unlike anything she had ever seen. Though she tried to stay calm, her wide eyes reflected her fear. The very air around them seemed to vibrate. Elijah felt a spiritual pull stronger than the warning of lightning. His duty, faith, and heart all pushed him toward helping the elderly woman. Anthony, though uneasy, decided to guide them despite the danger. Something inside him knew he couldn't let them go alone. The sky darkened with unnatural speed, swallowing the afternoon light. The temperature dropped sharply, and the wind roared like a beast awakening. Helen clutched her dress as she led the group toward a small wooden cabin where Geraldine lay pale and motionless. Inside, the room felt heavy, as if time itself slowed. Grandma Geraldine trembled weakly, her breaths shallow and fading. Marina pressed a cool cloth to her forehead, but panic filled her eyes. Elijah approached the frail woman, placing a gentle hand over hers. The storm slammed against the windows with a force that rattled the walls. Anthony secured the door, feeling it shake as though the wind wanted to rip it free. Helen gasped at each thunderous crash outside, her hands trembling as she watched the shadows dance. Elijah whispered a prayer, asking for guidance while Geraldine's breathing grew more uneven. The air thickened, with an eerie stillness between each gust of wind. Marina watched the pastor closely, sensing a presence around him she couldn't explain but deeply felt. Imvlash lit the entire cabin, followed by thunder that rolled through the floorboards. Anthony pushed harder against the door, muttering that he had never seen the sky act like a living force. Nothing about this storm felt like simple weather. When Elijah tightened his grip on Geraldine's hand, a warm pulse traveled through his palm. It startled him, yet felt strangely familiar. Helen leaned closer, noticing something unseen stirring in the space around them as the light flickered unnaturally. The howling wind outside suddenly eased, as if waiting. Geraldine's breaths steadied slightly, though she remained fragile. The moment was suspended, hanging between fear and miracle. Marina's eyes shimmered with hope, though she dared not speak it aloud. Anthony glanced over his shoulder, caught between disbelief and awe. He was a man grounded in harsh realities, not fantasies, yet nothing he knew could explain what he felt in the room. He watched Elijah, sensing the pastor was part of something beyond human strength. Marina held Helen's hand as they stood together, both shaken by the storm's strange rhythm with Geraldine's heartbeat. They felt the air tightening and loosening in perfect time, as though the storm itself breathed with the old woman. Elijah sensed the night was far from over. Something greater than a simple storm had taken shape. He felt in his soul that what happened inside this cabin would decide more than one life. The storm had not come to pass by. It had come with intention. Subscribe to the channel to follow the next parts of the story. The storm outside roared with renewed fury, pounding the cabin like a living force determined to break through. Elijah stayed beside Geraldine, sensing her breaths slip in and out of strength. Though weak, she clung to life with a quiet resilience that defied the surrounding chaos. Anthony braced himself against the trembling door, gritting his teeth as winds howled through every crack. He felt the wood bow under each violent gust. Even a seasoned cowboy like him had never faced weather that seemed driven by intention rather than nature itself. Helen paced anxiously, hands pressed to her chest as she tried to steady her racing heart. She felt the storm pressing against her mind, whispering unease into her thoughts. It was not fear alone, but the strange sense that this night would define them all. Marina kept watching Elijah with growing curiosity. There was something about the pastor's calm that didn't match the terror outside. He spoke softly to Geraldine, his voice steady even as thunder fractured the air. The storm felt almost aware of his presence. A violent crash shook the cabin as lightning struck nearby. The impact rattled the walls, sending dust falling from the beams. Anthony shouted that the sky had gone mad, his voice full of disbelief. He dug in his heels, determined not to let the storm take the door. Geraldine's breath faltered again, her frail chest rising only slightly. Elijah tightened his grip on her hand, praying for strength to reach her fading spirit. Helen knelt beside him, tears forming as she begged the old woman to hold on just a little longer. Marina wiped her eyes, trying to stay composed. She had spent years caring for Geraldine, yet she had never felt so helpless. The storm's rage grew worse with every heartbeat, as if the old woman's condition and the weather had become strangely intertwined. Another flash lit the room, revealing faces filled with dread. Anthony flinched but held firm. The cowboy felt something electric in the air, something beyond simple lightning. It was as if the storm reacted to every emotion inside the cabin, answering fear with fury. Elijah sensed a stirring deep within Geraldine's frail body. Her eyelids fluttered, and she murmured words too broken to understand. Helen leaned closer, trying to catch each whisper, but the storm drowned every syllable. Still, something in her tone felt urgent. The windows thudded violently as the storm hurled itself against the glass. Marina backed away from the walls, trembling. She had grown up in harsh weather, but this was different. It felt alive, it felt aware, and it felt like it was waiting for something from them. Elijah bowed his head and prayed louder, his voice resonating oddly in the tight space. The storm's rhythm shifted, almost as if listening. Thunder rolled slower, deeper, echoing like an answer. The wooden floor beneath them vibrated with each distant boom. Anthony looked over his shoulder, shock in his eyes. He muttered that he had never heard thunder speak that way. Elijah didn't respond. He simply continued, letting his faith pour into each word. Helen felt chills rise along her arms, despite the heat inside the room. Glancing at Geraldine, Marina gasped softly. The old woman's breathing had steadied for a moment, not healed, not strong, but no longer slipping. It was as if something invisible pushed back the shadows trying to claim her. Hope flickered in the dim light. Another wave of wind slammed into the cabin, nearly knocking Anthony off balance. He roared in defiance, pushing back with everything he had. Sweat rolled down his face despite the cold. Yet he refused to abandon the door, knowing everyone depended on him. Helen squeezed Geraldine's hand, whispering pleas through trembling lips. She felt helpless, yet she also sensed a presence moving through the room, a warmth, faint but growing. Marina felt it too, touching her chest as the air shifted around them like a soft pulse. Elijah raised his head, eyes calm despite the storm's rage. He didn't know what force responded to his prayers, but he felt it surrounding them now, gentle yet undeniable. He told Geraldine she wasn't alone, that something greater stood with her in that moment. A sudden silence fell, sharp and unnatural. The storm paused, holding its breath. Everyone froze. It was as if the world waited, listening to the next word, the next decision, the next heartbeat. Even the floor seemed still beneath their feet. Geraldine exhaled softly, her voice faint but clear enough to hear one fragile word. Light. And as Elijah leaned closer, the storm responded with a rumble that felt almost like acknowledgement, setting the stage for what would come next. Don't forget to like this video, it really helps the channel grow. The wind surged again, as if awakened by Geraldine's whispered word. The cabin groaned beneath the pressure, the walls trembling with renewed intensity. Elijah stepped toward the door, sensing the storm calling to him, urging him to confront something far beyond human strength. Anthony yelled that stepping outside was madness, but Elijah's calm, determined gaze silenced any argument. The pastor felt something powerful rising, not from the storm, but from within his own spirit. Even the cowboy saw that nothing could stop him now. Helen grabbed Elijah's arm, her voice cracking as she begged him not to go. Her fear was raw, fueled by a sinking certainty that the storm was more than weather. It felt like a force waiting for Elijah specifically. She clung to him, desperate to keep him safe. Marina watched with wide, troubled eyes, sensing the same pull Elijah felt. Something invisible pressed on all of them, urging the pastor forward. She whispered that maybe he was meant to face it, though even she trembled at the thought. Elijah pushed open the door, and the wind nearly knocked him back. Anthony rushed to help hold it open, straining against gusts that felt strong enough to rip the hinges free. Elijah stepped into the storm, rain slicing across his face like icy shards. The sky churned above him, clouds twisting into violent spirals. Thunder cracked in rhythmic bursts, almost like a heartbeat. Elijah lifted his face to the raging heavens, feeling the raw electric tension, pulling him deeper into the center of the storm. Helen and Marina stood in the doorway, gripping the frame as the wind whipped their dresses and hair wildly. Their hearts pounded as they watched Elijah step forward, with an unshakable calm, as if shielded by something unseen. The pastor raised both hands and began to pray aloud, his voice somehow rising above the roar. Each word seemed to echo in the air, carried by the storm instead of drowned by it. Lightning flared, illuminating his figure in stark, surreal flashes. Anthony stared in disbelief, gripping the door as the storm responded to Elijah's voice. Each thunderclap slowed, deepened, as though the sky itself were listening. The cowboy felt the hair on his arms rise, sensing forces he could not begin to understand. A colossal lightning bolt struck so close that the ground quaked. Yet Elijah did not flinch. He stepped closer to the swirling heart of the storm, feeling its fierce power wrap around him like a living presence. The clouds pulsed with strange rhythm. Helen screamed for him to come back, but her voice was swallowed by the wind. Marina held her tightly, tears streaming as they watched Elijah stand firm against forces capable of tearing the world apart. The storm's intensity made their breaths shallow. Slowly, the storm's core began to shrink. The violent spirals softened, and the thunder rolled in slower intervals. Elijah continued praying, each word steady, carrying warmth despite the freezing rain that drenched him completely. He knelt in the mud, lifting his eyes as the clouds twisted into a final burst of silver light. His voice grew stronger, deeper, resonating like it reached beyond the sky. The wind softened around him, swirling gently instead of striking with violence. The storm released one last, blinding flash, illuminating every ridge and shadow across the plains. Then, almost instantly, the sky calmed. The swirling clouds dissolved into soft streaks of grey and blue. Silence fell so abruptly, it hurt their ears. Anthony stumbled forward in awe. He had seen storms, beasts, drought, and death in his years, but nothing prepared him for this. He felt humbled, shaken, yet strangely uplifted. He knew he had witnessed something holy, though he could not explain it. Helen ran to Elijah, dropping to her knees beside him. She asked if he was hurt, her voice trembling. He reassured her softly, exhausted but unharmed. His calm smile held a depth that seemed touched by something otherworldly. Marina approached slowly, barely believing the storm had vanished. The sky was peaceful, the air warm again. She looked from Elijah to the horizon, sensing that something sacred had passed through their lives, leaving them forever changed. With the storm gone, Elijah rose with the help of the two young women. He knew this was not the end of what the storm had brought. Something had been set in motion, something that would define the future for all of them. Leave a comment below telling what you think about the story. When Elijah stepped back into the cabin, he found Geraldine sitting upright with surprising strength. Her once fading eyes now shimmered with clarity. Helen pressed a hand to her mouth in shock, struggling to understand how the frail woman had changed so quickly. Marina hurried to Geraldine's side, checking her temperature and holding her hand tenderly. The elderly woman smiled, weak but aware, as if she had awakened from a deep sleep. No one could deny she looked stronger than she had in years. Anthony entered last, soaked and speechless. He removed his hat and held it to his chest, something he rarely did. Nothing he had seen in all his years roaming Montana prepared him for the miracle unfolding before him. He didn't speak. He simply stared in awe. Elijah approached Geraldine with humble gentleness, asking how she felt. She answered softly that she felt lighter, as though something heavy had lifted from her soul. Her voice, though quiet, held a sharpness missing just hours earlier. Marina and Helen nearly cried with relief. The air inside the cabin felt renewed. Gone was the oppressive heaviness of the storm. Instead, a soft stillness filled the room, almost sacred. Light from the clearing sky streamed through the window, giving the space a warm, peaceful glow that soothed every heart. Geraldine took Elijah's hand and said she had seen a vision during the worst of the storm. She described a path of light that opened before her while she heard Elijah's prayers echoing like distant bells. She said something told her she still had purpose to fulfill. Helen wiped her eyes, overwhelmed by the idea that Geraldine had been so close to leaving them. The young woman felt a deep gratitude, a renewed sense of hope blooming in her chest. The miracle had touched her profoundly, shifting something inside her heart. Marina stood behind Geraldine, tears streaming freely. She had spent years caring for the old woman, watching her grow weaker each season. Seeing her now awake, alert, and full of gentle strength felt like witnessing time reverse itself. It was nothing short of wondrous. Anthony, still unsure what to say, finally muttered that this night would forever remain etched in his memory. He admitted the storm had not behaved naturally. It had been intentional, guided by a force he couldn't name. His words hung in the quiet air with conviction. Elijah listened with humility. He didn't claim credit for anything that had happened. He called it grace, something far greater than any man. He stood quietly, hands folded, accepting the moment not as his doing, but as part of a larger plan written in the storm. Anthony stepped outside to inspect the land. The fields were torn apart, trees uprooted as if giants had walked through them. Strange markings scorched the ground, looping in shapes he had never seen. Yet the cabin stood untouched, protected as if shielded by unseen walls. Helen followed him out and gasped at the surreal patterns carved into the earth. They looked like symbols, etched by lightning with uncanny precision. Marina joined them, staring in astonishment while the dawn sky brushed gold against the ruined landscape. Geraldine walked slowly to the doorway, supported by Helen and Marina. She breathed the crisp post-storm air with gratitude. When she saw the sky painted in gentle morning colors, she smiled and said the storm had not come to destroy, but to reveal what was hidden. Elijah felt a quiet stirring inside him at her words. They resonated with the feeling he carried since the clouds first gathered. He sensed the storm's purpose had been far more than weather. It was a sign, a message, and perhaps even a beginning. Marina gently asked Geraldine what else she had seen in her vision. The elderly woman said a figure of light had pointed toward the horizon and whispered that their future depended on unity. The message was simple, but layered with meaning they could not yet grasp. Anthony shifted uncomfortably, the weight of those words pressing on him. Despite being practical and rugged, he couldn't deny the chill running along his spine. Something monumental had happened, and he knew they all had a part in whatever came next. Elijah stood beside them, gazing over the calm land that had been torn apart just hours earlier. The silence wasn't empty, it was charged with promise. The group stood together, feeling their lives intertwined by something far bigger than coincidence. As they breathed the fresh morning air, every one of them sensed the truth. The storm had ended, but what it awakened was only beginning. Their futures, once separate, were now bound to a path none of them could yet see, shaped by light, faith, and destiny. Share this video with someone who loves good stories too. The rising sun cast warm gold across the Montana plains, revealing a world transformed after the storm's fierce passage. Elijah stood quietly at the ridge, watching light spread over the land like a blessing. He knew the night they survived would echo through each of their lives, shaping their paths in ways they could not yet imagine. Geraldine walked slowly beside Helen and Marina, her steps steadier than they had been in years. She spoke softly of the vision she had seen, describing the path of light that opened before her during the storm. She insisted the encounter was not meant to end her journey, but to renew it with greater purpose. Anthony observed the scarred fields with a solemn expression. The cowboy had witnessed countless storms, but nothing like this one. The strange markings, the sudden calm, and Geraldine's miraculous recovery challenged everything he believed. Yet instead of fear, he felt a new conviction stirring inside him. Elijah approached the center of the storm's remnants, sensing an echo in the earth beneath his boots. It felt like lingering energy, a reminder of something sacred that had brushed their world. He knew this place would remain a symbol for them, a boundary where the divine reached into their lives. As they gathered again near the cabin, a quiet bond settled among them. No words were needed to express what they shared. They understood the storm had not been an ending, but a beginning. Elijah glanced toward the brightening horizon, knowing destiny had only begun to unfold for them all. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, and share to support this project.